Hello, listeners! In today's bonus episode, I'm talking with one of my parents' friends from the counterculture, a psychedelic pioneer I call Far Out.
So what are your last thoughts here on Far Out? Any last things you want to tell us about Far Out, since we're going to tell his story on this podcast?
It's interesting. From me, I would say Far Out was the epitome of the left-wing politico hippie who started out as a left-wing intellectual and ended up as a hippie, super-duper pot-smoking guy who, in fact, he was the epitome. He sold, like, ounces and nickel bags and that kind of stuff, so he really supplied it to the people.
A ground floor member of San Francisco's counterculture, Far Out was the manager of a world-famous San Francisco rock and roll band. And like many of the psychedelic pioneers, he's a nice Jewish boy. He's from Chicago and landed in San Francisco's North Beach in the early 60s, where he became friends with my mom. San Francisco's North Beach neighborhood was ground zero for the city's iconic beatniks and the alternative art, literary, music, and comedy scene, before it morphed into the famed counterculture and moved to the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood in the late 60s. Now, for his entire adult life, Far Out has been in love with my mom's best friend from her North Beach belly dancing days. And Far Out spent lots of time around my mom's best friend's communal table, a famous gathering spot for future famed musicians like the Anonymous Artists of America and the Quicksilver, poster artists like Stanley Mouse and Alton Kelly, plus actors, writers, and smugglers who gathered to smoke doobies, schmooze, and eat Chinese food and hippie stew.
And people always, just went to the table, rolled joints, and drank coffee.
Rolled and smoked joints and drank coffee and just bullshitted.
Like all day and all evening, all the time. It was like a coffee house, only it was somebody's house.
Right.
Now, my mom's best friend's table is the same place where my dad met my mom in 1970, and where Dad met Far Out.
Yeah.
So that was a famous table by the time I got there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you got there.
Late.
Yeah, late.
You got to the table late, Dad?
Later. Yeah.
Now, although Far Out primarily worked in rock and roll, he had one good story about pot smuggling. Through Mexico, over the Rio Grande. I'm Rainbow Valentine. This is Disorganized Crime, Smuggler's Daughter.
Rolling a doobie, young, free, and groovy, making it up as we roll along. Rolling along, far out the country road. Feeling great in the Golden Gate, dodging the law up in New York State, making it up as we roll along.
Oh my god, okay, I have just taken a trip through the city, San Francisco, to get to the Castro, which is an awesome neighborhood, and I'm going to ring the doorbell. Oh, here we go. Okay, I went to Far Out's apartment in San Francisco. Now in his 80s, Far Out has been a small-time pot dealer for over 60 years, and he might be one of the last remaining psychedelic pioneers still living in San Francisco proper, in the Castro. And they're holding me. All right, here we go. All right, we're going in. All right.
Hi there.
How are you? I call him Far Out because he says it all the time with complete earnestness and far out awe. He really means it.
And since I say far out all the time, I probably say far out 102 times a day.
I love that. Now, Far Out was never a true smuggler. He was a band manager with a pot-dealing side hustle. But being a true psychedelic pioneer, he did one smuggling trip. And he told me about it while sitting in his tiny apartment full of pot paraphernalia and iconic memorabilia from his life amongst San Francisco's music superstars. His one smuggling trip happened to be some of the best pot he'd ever smoked.
It was the best, most spectacular Mexican pot I have ever run across in my life. It was literally Technicolor. It was yellow, gold, green, red, blue, and I've been smoking pot since 57. So what do we have? We have 62 years. So I consider my judgment pretty good. It was the best Mexican pot that I ever smoked in my life.
Now, being in his 80s, Far Out is vague on details like who asked him to supervise the trip. But remember, business was all done amongst close friends, so it was probably another psychedelic pioneer also in rock and roll.
They rented a house south of Mexico City, and they were going ahead with a purchase, and they needed somebody to supervise the whole operation. I flew down to Monterrey, which is in northern Mexico. At the airport in Monterrey, I rented a car. I rented a new Dodge, a 70 Dodge, and I started driving south.
Now, the rented Dodge became a critical part of Far Out's illicit adventure about to unfold.
And I drove all the way south of Mexico City. I drove hundreds of miles south, followed my nose. I arrived at the house. I entered the house. They took me to the back living room and the back room. And there in the back room, piled in a corner, was 250 pounds of the most beautiful Mexican pot. And they had already bought really thick, clear plastic vinyl. They'd bought sheets and sheets and sheets. So I decided what we're going to do is we're going to wrap these 250 pounds, 1 pound at a time. And then I had us separated into 5 piles of 50 pounds each, 50 bundles each. And we made 5 bundles. Each, there was 250 bundles. Then I made 5 bundles. Each bundle was 50 pounds. So it was wrapped over and over again with this vinyl because we were going to cross it on the river, on the Rio Grande.
Now, the Rio Grande has been a popular smuggling route since 1848, when the Mexican-American War ended, ceding Texas to the U.S. and causing trade issues between the countries, leading to tariffs. Rio Grande borderland residents, seeking to avoid paying tax on goods, began smuggling over the Rio Grande, adopting smuggling routes previously used as escapeways by Texas slaves seeking freedom in Mexico, which abolished slavery in 1828. So, the smuggling trip Far Out stepped into had a plan. Far Out would drive a wrapped cube of 250 pounds of pot 1,000 miles north through Mexico to the Rio Grande border. There, he would send it across the river, passing it off to the Texas smuggling crew waiting on the other side of the Rio Grande. Now, the Texas crew member was a physicist whose day job was to watch cloud chamber photographs of nuclear explosions. So Far Out and his crew set off north with the cube of 250 pounds of pot in Far Out's Dodge, which left first with the rest of the crew following 45 minutes behind.
So we started out, I had a few joints with me so I could smoke on the way. I figure if I see a check station up ahead, I'll just toss the joint out the window and open the windows and air out the car. And I come to the first town, and there's a restaurant. Basically, it's a roof on poles. There's no walls to the restaurant. It's a roof on poles with a bunch of tables, and there's a few people sitting around. And I pull up my car and park it, and in the meantime, while I've been sitting in this restaurant, some local drives his car. He's driving his car around the area, and he slides into a creek. So a few of the people hanging out at the restaurant get up. They go over to the other side of the road, and one of them has a machete with him. And he chops down a spindly, a thin tree, but by chopping down the tree, he gets a long pole with leverage. And they all go together, and they use this long chopped down tree and thing, and they jack this car, this truck out of the river, and everybody goes on with their life. I thought, far out.
Far Out finished his tacos and moved on, smoking doobies another 250 miles up the road to a hotel, where he meets up with the rest of the crew. Now, the hotel was just some random nowhere spot, nothing special. But it turns out the hotel is significant for a progressive socialist idealist like Far Out.
I'm walking downstairs to meet my friends and have breakfast. I'm on the second floor. And from the second floor down to the first floor into the big circle in the center is a sort of a bent stairway. There's a half a flight, and then a little landing, and then another flight going down. As I'm walking down the first flight towards the second flight going down, at that landing in the middle, as I'm walking down, I see a picture of Emiliano Zapata, an old hero of mine. He led the Mexican Revolution in the early 20th century. But he's a hero of mine, and I'm walking down the stairs. I'm approaching that picture hanging on the wall of Zapata. It's a famous picture of Zapata. He's got his bullets, banderillas across his chest. He's got his sombrero on his head, and he's holding his rifle. And as I'm walking down the stairs and I'm approaching that picture, a really strange, weird feeling comes over me. I can't figure out what's going on in my body and my head. And as I come to the bottom step and I'm standing in front of the picture, I realize the wall that the picture is hanging on is the wall against which Zapata is standing to have the picture taken. It turns out that the hotel that we were staying in used to be Zapata's headquarters. He used to ride his horse around that inner circle inside the brick wall. For me, this was even more of an adventure than the smuggle itself. You know, I stood where Zapata stood. This blew my mind. Even now, I get the chills thinking about it.
I'm Rainbow Valentine. This is Disorganized Crime. We'll be right back. After spending the night at Zapata's former headquarters, there was another 500 miles to go. So Far Out started out in the Dodge, and the crew followed, 45 minutes behind, a secret caravan of Sensimilla smugglers.
I took off. Another restaurant, 250 miles. They showed up. I finished up, paid my check. I went another 250 miles. That evening, we wound up together at a motel in Matamoros. We're going to wait till midnight to do the smuggle on the Rio Grande. We drive in my rented car to the Rio Grande. We drive to the beach. Now we get to the beach, and it's black as pitch. We're probably within 50 feet of the edge of the river. We've parked the car, and we've dragged this big bundle to the edge of the river. And the edge of this big bundle is sitting now on the edge. It's half in the water and half on land. I positioned it so the land part is holding it in place. We've got a rope on the bundle. The other end of the rope is in the hands of our Texas physicist friend, who's at the bottom of the river. He's got a walkie-talkie with him, and we've got a walkie-talkie with us. And we're in touch with him. He's under the water. We're on the Mexico side. He's entered the water from the Texas side. We're in touch by walkie-talkie. But also what we hear on our walkie-talkie is the Matamoros police radio.
Oh, Jesus.
They're all talking in Spanish, and almost every other word is marijuana. With every other word marijuana, we were sort of uptight. We couldn't. It was so black on the beach that we couldn't see anything, either in front of us or in all four directions. We couldn't see if anybody was approaching us. The cops could have been approaching us without their lights on, And, you know, what marijuana are they talking about? Are they talking about suspicion of us with marijuana or some other marijuana? Who knows? We're listening to them and we're talking to our